Hi, and continuing ongoing to trying to go to air here and get through to policy and decision makers and potentially media producers about putting this issue up on the Australian political map. Again, I've just got off the phone from an MP's office and just said, look, you could explain this to a child. You can go to a criminal court in Australia for not paying a parking fine, even if you can't afford to pay it. And you drive your car, if you don't pay it after 16 weeks, they'll criminalise you. So you will have preferenced bitumen above the value of a child in Australia, because if you steal a child off a parent contrary to family law court orders, parenting orders, and contrary to Article 9 of the UNESCO rights of the child and human rights of the parents, nothing happens to you at all. And so unfortunately, Labor has completely, as much as, you know, I've always voted for Labor, and anyone here would know that, changed it to the voluntary euthanasia vote party after I saw my mother die, though, and am sick of the Greens fighting with Labor. And I'm also sick of Labor having their budget spend overtaken by boys and their men's war toys. And not like anyone cares what I'm sick of, but I'm trying to make a case here that it is negligent and stupid economically to spend $600 billion on submarines when they won't turn up in time for China to have taken Taiwan and end up having a cup of tea at the port of Darwin, because the morons at the Country Party in the Northern Territory and at federal level, Malcolm Turnbull under the LNP allowed them to lease it for 99 years for a song for $500 million. I don't even reckon what's that per year. What they didn't even get, what they get for that, and yet they can't find money for women to have universally free childcare, which would, according to Bronwyn Bishop of the helicopter fame, another good man that they threw under the bus, like Julie Bishop, even though they were all doing the same thing that she was. She at least said to Jenny Brocky that there would be $1.89 return to the Australian tax base for every dollar spent on childcare, and that's the best available data that they had. I guess that was about 8 or 9 years ago now. Moving along, the point of this again is that I think a lot of people think, oh, well, why would we want to help her? She's embarrassing her children by talking about this. That's one of the arguments that I've had given back to me by a reputable media producer, and it leaves typically women in the hideously vexed position where, because you're a woman, you're just meant to roll over and take it like everybody. You're meant to cop it on the chin in order that your children don't have to be humiliated by what their fathers have done. A rose by any other name, that argument is essentially saying that, isn't it? It's essentially saying that, look, aside from the tech specs that the law doesn't allow us to talk about family law court cases per se in Australia because you could humiliate the child, what that actually, of course, infers automatically, by logic alone, is that the child should be humiliated by their parents' actions. And in the case of children whose parents have been abusive, and I say abusive, I mean consistently over 25 years, and then been abusive in someone else's case by allowing that parent to get away with it and aiding and abetting that parent, as the father of my eldest daughter did, then at least we can return to one part the Bible got right, that the boys wrote, which is the sins of the father shall not be visited on the child. And that was probably at least 2,500 years old, that idea, because you wouldn't want a child to have to suffer. It's not the sins of the mother in the book, is it? I guess because mothers didn't matter, or we're just whores. It's the sins of the father should not be visited upon the child. And of course, what kind of position are women left in if they want to talk about what men do to them and the men are parents themselves? Because it necessarily means that you have to do what women are asked and or told all around the world to do every day. Sit down, shut up and cop it. Because you wouldn't want to embarrass your children by revealing who their fathers were. Well, bugger that. It's too late anyway. And also, as I said, my youngest 2 children don't have Facebook accounts, and the eldest child's father participated alongside his accomplice so successfully in destroying our relationship, and that's a fait accompli. So, or at least it always was, because that's how he engineered it. Unbelievable. The self-advantageousness of people who don't want to pay child support payments either, as I've said yesterday. So trying to progress these ideas and not repeat them too much, although also addressing anyone who might bother to look at this with the viewpoint that they might be coming to it with totally fresh eyes. So reiterating a couple of key points so that nothing gets missed if people only view one thing and not the other. There's a couple of things I'd like to cover off because for all of the great lifestyles that my friends have disappeared in droves here, no money in sight. I can only presume that they're either thinking, well, she doesn't have a chance of winning this case, so I won't give her any money, or she's going to drink it. And I don't know the last time you went to a barrister or a lawyer, but they are expensive, and barristers will not take a brief directly from a client. There's like 2 in Australia, and they're very busy, as you can imagine, and so solicitors are required. I've got to, moving the ideas along, what I wanted to do was to talk about what people mean when they talk about abuse. At least I'm going to speak for myself here, because I could pull out an affidavit from my youngest child's father's wife, where she says she was only assaulted physically once when her coccyx bone was chipped when she was kicked up the bum in front of her children on Christmas Day. But the emotional, verbal and mental abuse was constant. And I tried to describe some of this on the weekend to a friend. One of the features of this particular person's abuse, and thank God I've had it corroborated by a male here today who knows him very well and saw it at close range and is willing to stump for me. That's a huge advent in my particular situation, because a lot of what women would be accused of, or any parent in these parenting cases get accused of when they're alleging abuse, is that it's retribution, or that it's hyperbole, or that it's through a lens of bias, that the parent has a negative hangover from the end of the relationship and how they perceive themselves to have been treated. And I think, isn't the term in academia real or imagined? And who's the arbiter of that anyway? But if 3 or 4 people over a quarter of a century all have an identikit experience of abuse constantly, and in my case, it extended to an outright life-threatening situation of my children, where one day as we were coming off the Harbour Bridge, and there's 5 separate exits if you're going northbound off the Carl Expressway and you wish to get to the northern beaches of Sydney from whence I spring, I grew up there. You can take 5 different exits. You go Neutral Bay, Manly, North Bridge, Chatswood, and then one more through Artarmon, I think. And probably if you overshoot the mark, you can loop it up through the back way, up through, I've forgotten the name of it. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Point being, when I gave him the keys to my car and he was driving and we were going to the northern beaches, my little baby boy was in the back seat of the car and strapped into his 3-point harness, and would only have been 1.5 years old. And so this deranged idiot starts jumping on and off the brake like at 80 kilometre speed. I'm in the front seat, my baby's in the back, he's driving my Mazda 3, and he's jumping on and off the brake of my car, endangering our lives on the 6-lane part of the exit of the Harbour Bridge. And of course, the other father of my eldest child knew all of this, because I kept saying, why are you helping this person? Look what they've done. Here's the affidavit of his ex-wife. Here's someone else's testimony in voicemail, which they knew they were leaving and they knew they were being recorded, so it's admissible, or at least it was meant to be. But our family law court judge, who we got, was the wrong judge, and she, Leanne Turner, mendaciously and idiotically halved the trial from 4 days to 2, which did not give me enough time to go and get an updated affidavit. And then she ruled the wife's affidavit out of evidence because it was older than 1 year, as I've explained before, as if murder after 1 year. Oh, well, it's been more than a year now. Look, we better get along with it. Rubbish. It was corroborating the police record as part of a long-term pattern of behaviour. And of course, we've heard from Carolyn Quadrio and other people recently in the news that the best predictor of future behaviour is past behaviour. unless someone has a profound change, like the guy who's on Australian Story tonight and was sleeping in a bush, psychotically hallucinating that the aliens were coming, and then managed to get himself a doctorate and a partner and a child 10 years later. Astonishing, but that person is the exception, not the rule. Although I love the arguments around neuroplasticity, but again, I do digress. So if we have a man who comes along, which we now do, so you might want to go again, I'm going to pitch for money here because you might want to go along and fund it because it's getting stronger. The case is getting stronger that a judge would listen to perhaps a man who wasn't in a relationship with this heterosexual man, attesting to the abuse of this man and attesting that he is way too negligent and drunk and self-obsessed and literally psychopathic is what he's been called yet again by a male who knows him at close range. And that should kick it over the line a bit, because people tend to think that if you're alleging abuse, and that's abuse where you're endangering someone's life, jumping on and off the car, screaming at them because they didn't take the direction. And if I was a poor communicator and honestly had failed to give the direction correctly, I was busy saying, it's okay, there's another exit up ahead, all right, just calm down, because he's going to kill us, or at least was prepared to endanger killing us in a 6-lane highway at 80 kilometres an hour coming off northbound off the Harbour Bridge, and then slamming a door in my face and bruising my nose and laughing when I was pregnant and all that sort of thing. I mean, as described the other day, being dragged around the kitchen floor by my hair because I dared to question that he'd poured oil, like oil from a pan, all over into the sink, and the only thing in the sink was the baby's porous plastic, my child's porous bib that was made of that nice rubber that actually is a scoop, so it catches the baby's food. And so, of course, this was all suddenly impregnated, and these are $15 items, 15 years ago. And so it was all impregnated. So I said, why'd you do that? Well, couldn't you have just, lifted it out? And I didn't go, you fucking asshole, or anything like that. I just said, what did you do? Look, it's, it's wrecked. Just disbelievingly. And any other normal person at that point would go, oh, sorry, yeah, right. But no, that was enough for him to turn around, because nobody could criticise these sociopaths, these narcissists, brittle little egos with something called criticism, which is genuinely warranted in that situation, or at least my reaction was. And anyone in a realm of what we would call reasonable people, because that's what the law refers to, remember, reasonable people, whoever they are. They're busy bombing children over in Gaza, aren't they? Reasonable who? Reasonable men or women? Reasonable men with their 97% gendered rape, war and murder. So, of course, I'm urging you again to go and have a look at these other pieces I've done to camera, because the case that I'm trying to present urgently to the family court is hopefully getting stronger by the day. People are coming out of the woodwork and going, oh, yeah, he was deranged. And that, in my case, he did this, this and this. And it can't be, again, as I've just said to the wonderful Tanya Plibersek's office and the wonderful her 2IC there, it just can't be that you can criminalise people for not being able to afford a parking fine and then put a mark against their name, if not send them to jail, for driving their car despite their skill set not changing one iota. But nothing happens to you at all if you steal a loving child from a loving parent. Nothing happens to you at all in Australia. So unfortunately, as much as I love Albo and love Labor, they have absolutely missed the boat, as well as secretly taking a few boat people apparently and sticking them on another island again in the last 2 weeks since the referendum, because we wouldn't want to risk giving Dutton another free kick, would we? There's atrocious misspends of male-oriented budgets, locking people up. It was over $2 billion cost under John Howard for those third-party procured incarceration camps to be built on Christmas Island, Nauru and Manus. And it's still not fixed in this country after last week. And I had been 2.5 years, and lots of other people for 2.5 years had been saying, you need to overturn the presumption of shared care, because women are getting stuck sharing their partners, with their ex-partners, sharing their children with their ex-partners who had abused them, as I was stuck doing under John Howard and Pauline Hanson's law in 2007, which has just been overturned last week by Labor and has been all over the news. And lots of women like me were campaigning for that change. But then, as I read to you yesterday, it's too late. They said politely in their letter from Rochelle White, the policy advisor for Katie Gallagher, the Minister for Women, said it's too late in your case. We're sorry if it came too late for you. And of course, this man has stolen my children, and I haven't tucked my 11-year-old daughter into bed since she was 8. And I was a federal government regulated family daycare operator and a nanny until 2021 for barristers. So, and my children are all at the top of the state. So, like, if you can imagine, and this is what really gets me about the lack of support that I'm getting from wealthy people here, if you can imagine the pain that it causes you as a parent to not see your own children, and you can imagine the pain that people are in having Israeli children and grandparents and every type of relative stolen by Hamas. And you can imagine the pain that people are in when they are in Ukraine and Russians come in and steal their children to deliberately cruel and ruin their morale, their mental health, which is a direct correlate of your emotional health in most cases, unless you're an ICE user or you do really have something structurally wrong with your brain, which I don't. On the opinion professionally of 3 psychiatrists and a psychologist who I rattled off the other day, Dr. Ranasinghe, Dr. Pace, Dr. Sturrock and Dr. Borenstein. All have said nothing wrong with this woman except total major clinical depression and complex PTSD due to the deprivation of her children. So look, I'd urge you to push around to any of these things that I've recorded to anybody who can make any proper meal of them at all. I don't want the cold comfort left over of having to go and make it myself as a filler-in of time for more time lost of my children's life. I just want my daughter back. As I told you yesterday, the last ominous email to my best friend trying to organise Christmas was I suggest she beg for one last chance to see her children. And of course, the logic there is that my daughter turns 12 at the end of January, and if I can't get before this legal case before the courts before the end of January, and she's so estranged as she now is, so parentally alienated and used to living as if I'm dead, then I want the court will listen to her because she's over 12, and she will say, no, I don't want to go back and live with my mum, thanks, anymore. And so that's his ominous warning of one last chance. The guy's a psychopath. I just thankfully, as I've told you, please, it's not a lost cause totally yet. And if I can get before the correct magistrate, I don't know whether to ask for the full bench of the family law court, because the risk there is that you're pushing it back way too far until they're available to all gather again. And you might not have a strong enough case anyway. They might tell you to get stuffed. But if you get before the wrong judge, that's it's so much of what Labor has missed, unfortunately. And I don't know why they have missed one of the central parts, is that there's no criminalisation of stealing children at all, because most of the people who I talk to, they go, well, I mean, aren't the police doing anything about it? And they have no idea that the police refuse outright. They think they're above the law. Officers of the law think they are above the family law. They think that it's for someone else to do, in the same way that, as I've explained before, when I was born, at that exact moment in Australian law, if you came home and bashed the crap out of your wife, to use a hideous expression, nothing would happen to you, because the police would turn a blind eye like, oh, that's a man's business. It's his wife. He can do what he wants. Or rape a child if you're a Catholic priest. Move him to the next parish. Don't press charges. Look what happened there. Look what's still happening all around the world. 2 women. And in Australia, you would think that there's a piece of family law in your hand and it says there's a big badge from the Federal Family Law Court and it says you're meant to pick up your child at this time and take them for the school holidays and drop them back at that time, so that there can be no argy-bargy and arguing between parents who hate each other anymore. No, there's no enforcement at all. Unless you're going to steal a child to Saudi Arabia or Japan or another country with a non-repatriation deal. There's the AFP, the Australian Federal Police, will get involved at that point. But it's a very high bar to get them involved. And when you've fallen down this far in your emotional health because you are absolutely grief-stricken all the time, you then, of course, get to have the argument mounted against you that you are, oh, you're not well enough. It's like, no. How about we start from the premise that you've completely traumatized me by taking little children who I loved and devoted my life to from me, and you've been cruel to people, for people, over 25 years. So how about you stop doing that and give them back to me, and we'll just see how long it takes me to get better. Because who would not? For example, the man I spoke to today is the 7th parent who hasn't seen his child at all since she was 9, and she's now 23. And he said that he felt suicidal for 10 years. And went through the court process as she moved the child and refused contact and refused to return calls and refused to return emails. And remember, I reminded you that there's a photo on my page here of my daughter's burnt leg, and when she sent that to me on WhatsApp and I asked her what happened, and she said she fell asleep next to a heater, a radiator at her father's house, and I rang him up and I was like, she could have died, you negligent asshole. It's like, bam, all communications were off. And so again, women are asked to just sit down, shut up and take it, in case you scare the horses and you scare the boys off their big brittle egos. This man is a deranged, negligent person who should not be anywhere near children if he's allowing her to potentially die in a house fire or have her legs burnt in the middle of the night by falling asleep next to a radiator. Whether he was sober or drunk at the time, I'll never know. Whether he was even present at the time, I'll never know. But what we all do know from that photo, go and have a look at it further down this Facebook feed, is that that child could have died in a house fire. And how tired must she have been to have sustained that level of burn in her knee, with the astonishing array of brown bruising around it, which did not finish there, by the way. It went down to her ankle, and he did not take her to a GP at all. And they've been so brainwashed that when I mentioned this to my eldest child, she said, who had told me, by the way, that nobody could possibly respect me because I was just a childcare worker, having been reduced by federal government policy settings of both Labor and Liberal Party to just being a childcare worker, because as a single mum escaping an abusive man, at $140 per child per day daycare costs, $280, as I've said before, $1,400, $280 a day, $1,400 a week, 72 grand a year, minus rebates, $54,000 out of pocket before you've even paid your rent or your mortgage. So if you're stuck in that loop and you then are obliged by John Howard and Pauline Hanson to share your child with someone who abused you. And then that, which is what happened in my case, gave that person credence to have claim on my child because the child was already being shared, so that when my mother died in June in June 2016, and 12 weeks later, her stepbrother, my godfather, Warren Rogers, murdered his wife with a pillow over her face as I bled to death and couldn't afford to wait for 5 weeks on the public wait list for an emergency surgery hysterectomy. So I had to sell my house in a rainforest at Woy Woy, overlooking the water, to pay to save my life. In this situation, I had to self-defend because I also couldn't afford a lawyer, and lost because we got the wrong judge. And she comes in and goes, oh, you're a bit emotional. Well, like, who wouldn't be after their mother had just died, full stop, let alone mother stepfather murders his wife at 68 years of age after 45 years of marriage, and you're bleeding to death and losing your house. And then you stand in November 2016, as I did, and self-defended and lost her when we got the wrong judge. And this piece of shit, Leanne Turner is her name, again, I hope you're watching, I'm going to send it to you, I came along and cut the trial dates from 4 days down to 2. And crucially, she did that, she was very clever, because she knew that that would disallow me the time to go and ask the wife of the person who'd abused me, the original wife, the ex-wife, for an updated affidavit. And I had no idea, because I'm not a lawyer, that affidavit's run out after 1 year, even though the affidavit was directly corroborated by the subpoenaed New South Wales police record. And so because that happened, I didn't have enough time to contact Lindy and ask Lindy Green and ask her for another updated affidavit, because the judge that we got at trial was the wrong judge. And she's from Brisbane, so I can only conclude she wanted to go see the Opera House, because she cut the trial dates from 4 days down to 2, even though 4 days had been set aside because our case was complex. Because when two people will not find any common ground over it, a judge necessarily has to rule sole parental responsibility to one or the other. And Federal Magistrate Dale Kemp had taken one look at Ian Little's police record and said, I'm going to rule SPR here, sole parental responsibility. So if you don't make an agreement between each other, one of you is going to lose big time. Well, I just was like, great, that's excellent. Well, at least I won't have to deal with him anymore. It's going to be me, obviously, because I'm the childcare worker who owns a house and has bought another one and da-da-da. No, we got a completely different judge on the day, who then cut the trial dates from 4 days down to 2, disallowing me to get an updated affidavit from Lindy Green, and then ruled out of evidence Michelle Daly's voluntarily left voicemail message calling him completely mentally unwell after she spent 4 years with him, and she's a senior state bureaucrat. She's not silly. And so that was technically admissible, because when people know they're being recorded, you can put it before a court of law, because they know that they're being recorded and you're not sneaking around on them. And when I said, well, I've got the voice recording here and I've transcribed it into my affidavit, she said, do you have a transcriber's qualification, Miss Farrow-Pryke? And I went, well, no, but I speak English and so does my interlocutor, and I've got a degree in communication and from UTS. And she goes, that's not what I said. I was like, well, I've got the voicemail here. She said, no, that's out too. Got anything else? And I was like, it was watching a horror show unfold, because I'm going, oh my God, but this is critical evidence. Like, it's corroborated on the police record. And these are 3 women, not one. It's not just me, it's everyone. So look, again, I just end up collapsing in a puddle of tears. Labor's completely missed their moment here too. Sorry, Labor, I do love you. And Albo, you have aged 10 years in 2 weeks since the referendum. Much apologies. Noble, brave job there. Truth-telling needed to come first. Very hard to tell young children, though, that their forebears, who everyone's supposed to be proud of the Anzacs and proud of your forebears selectively when it suits you, but not too proud of your forebears if they stole Aboriginal children off their mothers and fathers and threw them into a campfire, because that's where Aboriginals were easy to get, was at night when they had campfires. So they'd steal the children and throw them in a fire, or drive them off cliffs, or beat them, or rape them, or shoot them, or just give them smallpox and then drive them onto missions and further, and then try to genocide them over time. Even though they lied when they got here and said, oh, look, empty land, terra, land, nullius, empty, in the Latin, terra nullius, empty land. Because in 1788, you had to either make a treaty, pay reparations for taking someone's land, or just vanquish them in a war, or if it was empty, you could just take it under British law. So they lied to themselves. 65,000 years of occupation with 300 different nations. So the British lied to themselves. So the country is, in the same way that Gaza is being occupied by Israel, the country is actually illegal. The actual Australian country, that these 60% bogans like, oh, the Abos, what do they want now? Their land back would be the answer under our own law. But again, I do digress. You can't steal a child. It's against natural law. I mean, if the parent is negligent, like Sinead O'Connor described at length, that her mother would leave her out overnight in the elements and beat her, make her lie prostrate naked, and beat her and make her repeat that she was nothing as she beat her, and then pick up a phone call and act like nothing was happening. I mean, these people were insane. If a parent is like that, of course you take a child off a parent, but not when a parent's run a federal government regulated family daycare service because they couldn't afford to put their own children in childcare, leaving an abusive man, and so has 4 years, like I did, of 50-hour-a-week references from clients, including nannying clients in 2021, after I'd had the nervous breakdown from losing my 5-year-old. And there went my son, only to be given away by my own family to a foster carer, at which point he was placed with this abusive man. And so there's just and after his father had had a crack, and of course, how do you tell children that their father has done this to everyone they've ever been with? Because the children don't want to know that. So you can't tell the children, but you can tell a politician, and you can tell it in a documentary and change your voice and make it a shadow so that the children don't have to learn the horror of who their fathers actually have been. Because, of course, the horrible thing, as Peter Weir, the great Australian filmmaker, has said, he can't make Hollywood films anymore because they just want a black and white world. The horrible thing is that those parents are simultaneously also really good parents in other ways to the children. So particularly in my eldest daughter's case, he was very financially generous towards her and had an ethos of education and music. And I valued that, which is why I thought it would be a good idea in the first place for us to co-parent our child. I didn't realise who he would be over time. Unfortunately, I didn't know that. I didn't have a crystal ball. Who does? but I guess I should have seen some warning signs. And of course, I saw there were enough warning signs there already with my youngest child's father as well, because he had shown over time, and I've tried to explain, I wasn't on the pill, and these things are personal to talk about, but men should know what women go through. I couldn't take it because it literally disagreed with me. Like Beth Stelling, the great comedian on Netflix, says it in her latest show. She says she couldn't take the pill because it just made her go batshit crazy and it made her put on a lot of weight. And it had a negative effect on me, as it screws with your hormones. And so I couldn't take the pill, and so relied on other methods, shall we say. And at 41, did not think I would fall pregnant again. So, I only had one planned child, but I love all three equally. And of course, it was only 52 years ago that the pill turned up in the whole of human history. So as soon as a penis went near a vagina historically, there was a likelihood that a woman would be pregnant, which is why so many societies had it worked out to marry off, and they did marry them off in deals between families and men, women at a young age when they could be of reproductive age, because it was likely from 14 or 15 that they were going to bear children. And so, This is, we blame women again now as well. What's one thing that my LNP voting sister, who's rich on the back of other people, said to me once, is like, the problem with the world is that all these poor women keep having children so that when they're old they can look after them in case a few of them die. And I was like, wow, yeah, okay, I get that. But where do you start with that? Given that it's true that a lot of their children will die because they're living in atrocious conditions of poverty, where things that we pay $2 for a pill, medicine for, will cure our children, but they're so poor they can't afford it. So yes, that argument or aspects of it may be valid, that women in the third world have children because many of their children may be going to die before they get old enough to be looked after and not in a nursing home, because they're not barbaric enough to do that in those cultures. They believe that you should look after everybody in many other cultures that are just not us anymore, at least. And the other part of that, of course, is that this person is obviously so stupid and or uneducated, or deliberately uneducated, particularly when they could turn on the news at night or listen to Melinda Gates from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who said that women go into third world countries all over the place to get their children inoculated against smallpox and diphtheria and tetanus and all those other things, that we take for granted. And then they turn around and say to the doctors, well, where's my shot? And they say, what do you mean? So, well, where's my shot in my arm that keeps me from getting pregnant for another 3 months, my Primavera or whatever it is. And I'm going to go back home if you don't give me a shot to keep me from getting pregnant. And he's going to, whenever we have sex again, impregnate me, whether I like it or not. And I can't afford even these children, so how can I afford the others? So there was this unbelievable situation that I encountered about 10 years ago now up on the northern beaches, where I heard that argument from one of my sisters, and she's very entitled, again, she married into wealth, didn't create it herself, and her unpaid labour's obviously created the whatever she's entitled to in Australian law in her marriage. But the point of it is that she even believed in this day and age, like you couldn't turn on the TV or read a book and realise that women all over the world never had any control over their fertility, and still don't in most places on earth. It's governed by men. It's governed by male government's spend on not providing them with universally free childcare, because they can't even afford feeding their children. So how are they going to afford to go down the road and get a script for the pill? And then half these governments are run by male-run religions who want to control their bodies and them anyway. That's the foundational principle of these misogynist male religions. They wish to control female sexuality and always have. It's all the way back in the Bible, the dirty unmarried slut mothers. So yes, they wish to control women and their fertility and reproductivity. My friend who's a scientist, Tom, was saying on the weekend it's a Malthusian model where presumes that men come in and the only onus is on biological reproduction, and so the control of war and other features of male religion controlling women and their bodies and their lives is that control their reproductive ability. But of course, a modern democracy is meant to liberate us from that isn't it? And technologies have always liberated human beings for all of human history into the next advanced stage of their life. When we picked up tools with our opposable thumbs and made things out of them, it advanced us to be able to eventually farm and not have to climb trees for fruit, etc. And that's how we progress as human beings. It's the advent of technology which progresses all of humanity. And so the advent of the pill progressed at least some women in some places on earth into some form of democracy, where they had some control over their fertility. And yet they're over in America still, there goes Roe versus Wade. In my lifetime, it got abolished by Trump, telling women that they did not have an enshrined right to an abortion. So getting slightly off topic, but not really, because it's still about men and women and the control of them in the world and policy settings in a modern democracy like Australia. And it is still about fixing these laws. And then how do you fix them if you're in a situation where Labor's just had a major chance? Again, I love Labor. You've done a lot of things right, but boy, did you get this one wrong. You had a major, major chance to fix the Family Law Court Act by also making it illegal to steal children off their other parent, particularly against family law court orders, which I have. And I got the wrong orders because we got the wrong judge from all of the catastrophe described above. So now need a lawyer, and they're not free. And if you have a house, just as I just still have one, you may not meet the asset test at legal aid, and if you don't have a winnable case, you certainly won't win the test. So then you are left to do it yourself again. And I keep trying to explain to people, it's really becoming quite clear that even people who've known me for 30 years and knew me when I was happy, are prepared to let me drown, literally, and prepared, more importantly, to let my little children's mum drown and not be protected by a parent who's loving and responsible enough not to expose my child to a radiator that would burn her leg at night and potentially cause her to die in a house fire. So, push it around if you can and throw in some money if you can. I'm sorry, I really hate collapsing in pools of tears at the end of this, but there's just nothing more tormenting and torturous and destructive that you can do to a loving parent than take their child from them. And as I said, if I'm now up to number 7 adult that I know out of 660 people, that's over 1% of every adult I know in my educated group of friends. And I say that because they largely are, and that's not a crime. Remember how the bogan right wing have taught you that if you've got a brain in this country, you fucking up yourself or some shit. The tall poppy or don't get above it. I mean, there's nothing wrong with education, right? We are not that insane. I refuse to be that insane. So of my cohort of educated friends, and they're kind, loving, educated people, they were good parents, loving mainly men, 7 of them have not seen their children in years, and they wanted to die. It destroyed them so much. So please help if you can. If you are a person with some spare coin, please help, because I need a lawyer. And the psychologist is free. He was kind enough to do that. Eventually the psychiatrist did too. Both of them have said there's nothing we can do to help you because you're stuck in this horrible grief. Because of course you miss your children, and of course that makes you depressed. So, why bullshit on either while we're at it that you care about Are You OK Day? If the answer is no, I'm not, because you've stolen my children and it's not even illegal in Australia in 2023, but it is illegal to not pay a parking fine, you got a fucked up nation. And that is the problem. So the problem's over there. There it is out there in the system, in that structure. I've identified that, but it doesn't help the pain that you still feel in here. But what would help is to get my children back. So please, help if you can. If I've missed something, I hope to get it tomorrow. But yeah, there are men now in this story who have correctly identified this perpetrator as what they called, in their words, spontaneously, a psychopath. And he lived at close range and saw this and knows that this person's dangerous. And who could sleep at night if they knew that their little girl or boy could die in a house fire? my oldest child, who'd managed to be taught by her father that I was just a childcare worker, so I was nothing because I'd failed. When she didn't seem to be able to work out in her 16-year-old mind a couple of years ago that, well, you know, as soon as I was going to be a single parent and not wealthy with an established career because I tried for one in the arts and failed, that I was always going to be in that position, and so are so many other women always going to be in that position unless there is universally free childcare. Particularly when they're leaving someone who's been abusive to them and then has ruined parts of them, deep and necessarily important parts of them, and who has lost the respect of people because in dealing with that grief, to medicate yourself, you know, I make no bones about it, like particularly in lockdown when I got stuck in a state in a border closure and my partner left at 5 years, I just started, I drank for quite a while, and because the pain is overwhelming. And I always thought of alcoholics as weak. Matthew Perry just died yesterday. It's terribly sad. He seemed like a nice guy, you know. I say that not knowing him at all, obviously, but he gave of his money and time to rehabilitation clinics for people to be sober in. But you know, and of course you don't have to be in pain to become alcoholic. It's just there. It's what I call availability theory. It's just available so people can have it. Whereas there are people staggering around the world now in Gaza, in Africa, in Ukraine, and they desperately need some relief from the pain in their minds and their hearts, but they've got none because there's no heroin. Whereas you get nice, educated, rich white people in Australia, oh, look, there's some heroin, bam, and then suddenly they're addicted. It's just availability, isn't it? But so if you are in that much pain, you know, you do tend to go towards trying to alleviate yourself of that pain. It does not reduce the validity of your pain, and it does not reduce the validity of your position as a parent, particularly not when you stand up every day and soldier on nannying for barristers and lawyers 50 hours a week, if only to show that you can put a roof over your children's heads still, if that's all that's left to you, because no one will let you back into your communications degree game, and that you can show to the court, well, I can look after other people's children with glowing references, so why can't I look after mine? Where's your answer? So please help, because that's what I intend to say to hopefully a fair-minded judge. It's just wrong. Like so much of the world, this situation is just wrong. Sorry, if you can help, please push it around to others who can help if you can't. Bye.